Good evening. If you can see me, if you can see us, that can only mean one thing. It's Mental Health Monday. Once again, welcome to Mental Health Monday, brought to you by Saving Grace Community Church and Grace House Cincinnati, a nonprofit agency and ministry of Saving Grace Community Church. I'm here once again with my cohort partner in crime, Dr. Quentin Moss, Chief Medical Officer and founder of Modern Psychiatry. Good evening, my friend.
Good evening, brother. It's good to be here with you.
On this spring day, not a few days removed from a very blustery weekend, we are entering into the spring season. And at this particular time of year, a lot of things begin to resurface, subjects that people really, whose interests are piqued and about different things. And so one thing tonight, our focus tonight is really something that people loosely use in conversation, a term that they usually kick around, and they usually talk about and refer to people who like to clean their house or make you take their shoes off before entering, or are very meticulous even cleaning their cars, or who practice hygiene. And they often refer to them as being OCD.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's our demonstration, sort of our definition, or assigning somebody with that label. But what is OCD?
You know, OCD is a medical condition. It's a brain condition where people may have one or two things, or maybe both. One, they can have these thoughts that come in, and intrusive thoughts, as we describe them, and they may tend to go over and over. They may be very uncomfortable. Maybe images that they may have in their minds. It may also be associated with sometimes words or songs that they can't seem to get out of their head, and they may experience that for a significant period of time. And to counteract that, either there's another thought or another behavior that may be used to try to help them feel better or get some relief from that. And it causes a great deal of dysfunction, right? So that's one. The other is a compulsive act. So the first was an obsessive thought. The second is a compulsive act, whether there's hand washing is a common one, counting, excessive cleaning. Perhaps some people like to do things with their hands or other parts of their bodies, but there's an uncomfortable urge that someone feels, and there is an act that needs to be performed in order to relieve that urge. And people can experience this, unfortunately, for not just minutes a day, but for hours a day. And it gets to the point where it starts to inhibit them from being productive, from being able to do the typical things that we would like to do with our day. But they're spending hours, unfortunately, either stuck in these obsessive thoughts or having difficulty with these compulsive behaviors.
And for many people, it can feel like they are definitely in bondage.
Oh, yeah.
Here is a person that kind of describes how they feel.
OCD to me is having a graveyard in your brain of the things that you once loved, that OCD waged a war upon and just decimated.
OCD is a nightmare of a mental illness that has derailed my life.
OCD for me has been an evil, crippling monster.
A monster in your head that is hell-bent, primally influenced and primally motivated to target and kill everything that you love.
So certainly, just in that first clip, it's oppressive, and anybody that is experiencing a disorder like that is oppressive. Uh, it seems like that the struggle is real.
Mm-hmm.
Do people get violent, as they fight their obsessions and compulsions? And so let me make sure I understand this. Obsession is a thought that you're fixated on something,
That's
and a
right.
compulsion is the carrying through with that thought.
Well, again, the obsession is, as you mentioned, the thought, but the compulsion may not even be related to that thought.
Mm,
Sometimes it is, but it may not be related to that thought. Someone could have the compulsion that a common one is that my hands aren't clean. And
mm,
so, they're the challenge is, of course, trying to work with them through some mind exercises so that they understand that their hands are clean. But the compulsion may lead to them to, washing their hands 20 times a day, and for more than 10 minutes each time. And if you
mm,
start to add that up, that's up to a great deal of the day that people may spend in the bathroom simply washing their hands. So the other part of that are, do people with obsessive compulsive disorder, are they violent? And typically not. Quite honestly, most people who have unfortunately with mental illness are not violent.
mhm.
So that is not necessarily a relationship.
Well, that's good to point out because we often think about that, and sometimes we need to circle back to that to assure people that if someone is suffering from a mental illness, or they've been overcome, or uh, have to live with a certain disorder, it does not necessarily that their inability to cope at times will result in a violent act. And I think that's why it's so important that even when we think about OCD, that tonight's discussion is imperative so people understand that though we use the term loosely, that there are some people the struggle is real, and that's a lot of time. That's a lot of time. So it raises the question: uh, how functional can people be with living with this disorder, Dr. Moss?
Well, if you're untreated or still quite symptomatic, it's sometimes difficult to work.
Hmm.
One common compulsive behavior is checking, whether you're
Hmm.
checking lights or checking the stove or checking the door to make sure it's locked. So you can have someone who goes through the ritual of checking all the locks, all the windows, all the doors, and they leave. And then their urge becomes so strong that even 5 minutes en route to work, they got to turn back around, go back home, and they got to repeat the whole ritual over and over again. So these
Hmm.
are people who are able to work, but their symptoms even prevent them from being able to leave the house,
Hmm.
in a timely manner to get to wherever they need to get to, because the illness is to that degree. Now, of course, this is something that is treatable,
Hmm.
challenging to treat for sure,
Hmm.
but it is something
Hmm.
that's treatable.
Normally, in treating this disorder, is it something that's done with medication? Of course, I'm sure some therapy, but what specific medications are used to help treat this disorder, and what are some of the advantages of those medications and some of the drawbacks and side effects that may present themselves as one begins to take them?
We find that if we can help the brain to utilize a certain neurotransmitter, serotonin, a little bit more effectively, then people are
Hmm.
able to reduce their symptoms. If we can target certain parts of the brain effectively with treatments, then people have better outcomes. So there's a whole class of medications, antidepressants, and then if we were to narrow that down a little bit more, serotonin reuptake inhibitors, in which those
Hmm.
include, Prozac, Zoloft, Paxil, have been shown to be effective in treating this condition. But there's actually one particular medication, Luvox,
Hmm.
that has been very effective in helping people overcome their obsessive compulsive symptoms. And then an older medication called anafranil that we sometimes have to use to be able to help people with their symptoms. medications come with side effects, right? So there's the possibility of headaches, stomach upset, difficulty with sleeping, or changes in mood, sexual side effects for some of these medications. All of those things are possible when we prescribe. But for most of our patients who are coming in to get help, the risk of those side effects are outweighed by the benefits that people will get. Now, what's pretty cool is that in psychiatry, we're developing more and more procedures that can be able to help people.
Mhm.
So there's transmagnetic stimulation, which is a way that we can send waves to certain parts of the brain, and we use this to treat certain anxiety disorders, certain forms of depression. And there's been a lot of literature and evidence that says that it helps for obsessive compulsive disorder. So
Mhm.
now in mental health, we have more tools to be able to help folks, but we still have a lot of people who are impaired.
Mhm.
We have up to 2.5% of the population, in America at any given time may have OCD. Minority populations tend not to get the treatment that's necessary, due to access and other things.
Mhm.
So there's ample opportunity for us to do a lot with this condition to be able to help people.
I think that the resistance for some people to get help is really because it's one of those things that they might minimize its effect. And some people may say, well, it's just what it is, just the way I am. And I think because uh, so many jokes are made about the disorder and how it's just loosely thrown around, that people really, even though they may have been experiencing some serious um, side effects and may be debilitating and preventing them from go about doing their normal thing, some that have just accepted it. But it is something that we know is a equal opportunity infector. And so let's take a look at this clip.
What is OCD to you?
Feels like you're treading water sometimes, but you can't reach the bottom or reach the top. You're like at that in-between part where you feel like you're drowning. And you can't really pull yourself out of it. And you feel like a bunch of bricks on your shoulders and you can never truly come above. But once you do, and you do see that light, it's a little different and you view things differently.
I think for me, what OCD is your brain is just hyperactive and it's constantly looking and scanning for things, telling you consistently that something's dangerous in your environment. And so you're always on edge. You're always trying to protect yourself and you come up with these behaviors and avoidances to keep yourself safe.
OCD is a disorder in which you're obsessing and compulsing for at least an hour or more a day. And your life is literally being restricted as if like you're being killed by a boa constrictor. It's this tightening sensation.
In essence, suffering with OCD is like being in hell.
Well, that certainly is lets us know that though we joke about it, it's really, it can be really it can be really debilitating.
It can be. And, Pastor, when I have patients who come to my practice, there's a lot more embarrassment in coming in with this condition than people coming in for depression, panic attacks, or bipolar disorder or ADHD. As I describe, the rituals or the compulsive behaviors that they have to go through in order to get, temporary relief from the urges. People don't want to come in and talk about have to have to count things, when they go into a room. People don't want to talk about the hand washing. People don't want to talk about how they have to walk in a certain way in order, feeling, this great sense of anxiety and tension. So yeah, there's a lot more stigma surrounding that. But there's another form of this OCD that I've seen over the years. There's a spiritual component of this. So we tend to call this scrupulosity. And typically what happens is that OCD has a way of penetrating that particular person's faith system. And I've seen it in Christians, I've seen it in Muslims, I've seen it across, faith groups, and that they feel as if they've committed some act or sin that can't be forgiven.
Wow.
And so they go through trying to do behaviors that may be able to give them some sense of redemption, but they're always feeling trapped, as if there's this God that sits above them that has
Hmm.
judged them for that particular act, and that there's nothing they can do to be forgiven for that. And that is, that is a very severe form of the illness, because not only does it, take into consideration the obsessive thought, as we've
Hmm.
talked about, but people then have a great deal of anxiety about their salvation or the
Mm.
afterlife and what's going to happen, and trying to really work through a lot of cognitive exercises, bringing in spiritual leaders who give them guidance in the scriptures to be able to help them to start to unravel some of that.
Well, that's a great that's really eye opening, because we talk about in our religious experience, faith and grace and forgiveness and
Hmm.
confession of sin, and that He's faithful to forgive you of your
Right.
sins and cleanse you of anything that may be ill or wrong with you. But we would also, from a theological standpoint, say that the devil's big in shaming and guilting. And so scripture talks about there's no more condemnation, for them that are in Christ, who walk not after the flesh, but after the spirit. And so how can what strategy could we employ to help the faith community uh, to understand how this is this a psycho spiritual connection?
Hmm.
Big,
Yeah, I think that, if a faith leader finds that after they've sat down with someone, they've kind of walked them through what the doctrine says, what the spiritual tradition is for that particular faith, and if the person continues to suffer despite the information that's being provided, and we see the deterioration that it's having in their life at home and their life at work, then that's probably someone who warrants a referral to a mental health professional to see if scrupulosity or this form of OCD is taking place. And then that mental health provider and that spiritual leader can work together with that person to try to help them to reduce their symptoms.
I feel a workshop on the horizon, because I'm sure those that will view this program, that's going to really blow them away. And that's the challenge, is to make sure that persons in the faith community have information. Information is power, knowledge is power, to help them better suit to minister
Hmm.
to those that are laid at under their charge, and to make sure that um, that shaming must not be a part of in a faith community of what we do, and hearing people out and understanding, you know, perhaps that it may be something else going on, rather than a faith issue.
Hmm.
So as I think about um, this whole disorder, one thing that we are mindful of is that you minorities, there might be an underreporting or not a much diagnosis, um, comparatively to other populations. Does it affect minorities disproportionately, or females or men disproportionately?
Well, it doesn't affect minorities necessarily disproportionately, but what we do find is that when we identify this in minority groups, there were studies done on African Americans, and then, people that come from the Caribbean. And when they
Mm,
looked at them and across a national sample, they found their symptoms were worse.
wow.
And so, it begs the question, why is this symptomatology worse when we identify it? And it might be because, we go so long before
Mm,
we're able to receive treatment. And
mm,
that happens with a lot of the mental health conditions that either we lack access, meaning it's difficult for us to get in to receive treatment, or that there's so much stigma that just kind of prolongs and prolongs and prolongs until we're able to get treatment. And then, of course, it comes with other, comorbidities, comes with a great deal of depression
mm,
or with other, mental health conditions. As I was, going through some of the literature and looking at, OCD, there's a growing school of thought that raises the association that's always been there regarding trauma in OCD. And we tend to think about OCD and cleanliness as far as people who are very obsessive about order, symmetry, people who have to do a great deal of cleaning or hand washing or germaphobes. And that is, how we kind of materialize an external threat or an external contamination. But for some people who may have had some type of physical or emotional trauma, it's really an internal contamination that's taken place. And this internal contamination, whether it's for the words that were said to you, how someone treated you, or something very inappropriate that someone did physically to you, that then becomes manifest with these external contaminations.
Wow.
So there's one psychologist, interpretation of how trauma is often related to people who have, obsessive compulsive disorder. Not all the time, for some. Then for the others, we know that there's up to, a 40%, rate of inheritance. So that if I have a first degree relative, meaning parent or sibling that may have OCD, that there's up to a 40% chance that I may also develop that condition.
So it is something a condition you can inherit.
But yes, it is.
Well, we know that it affects everyone. And here's a clip bearing that out.
Somebody would have asked me if I thought I had a mental illness. I would have said, not me. I just had no idea. And so it took a while for me to really come to terms with knowing something was wrong and wanting to do something about it. I was very secretive. And I think as I got older, I became more transparent.
As a mom, what does Chris's OCD mean to you?
I had no idea if he would get better. I had no idea if he would have a regular life, if there was treatment that could help him. So it was a very scary time to think that a totally normal person had become almost like a toddler.
One thing about the disorder is it doesn't just hit you all at once. It slowly consumes you until it gets to a point that's overwhelming. There were so many moments when I was younger, especially in high school, full-fledged OCD, but at the time you just don't realize what it is.
The definition.
At what age do some people begin displaying characteristics of this disorder? How young? And is it a difference between when men may start, or males start displaying it, this disorder, or having disorder, than females?
Well, people can have the onset of this condition very early in childhood, but most people have the incidence late adolescence. That's when most people start to experience it. And I haven't seen the difference between men and women, in presentation, but it's interesting that you bring this up because most of the people who've actually come to my office, they've been males, who are seeking treatment. Whether it's transitioning from high school to college, whether it's people who have been early in their careers, or people who've had the illness for a considerable period of time, and it's impacted their ability to have life attainment, and they've eventually done something with it.
Wow. Well, we use the term again loosely, and we will say stuff like they're obsessing about something.
Yeah.
One person that has brought attention to OCD is Howie Mandel, who appears on television, a part of some of the talent shows, and we know him most of us. He first came before us doing Deal or No Deal, and so a few years back, ABC did a special on OCD and featured him. Let's take a look at part of that clip.
Mandel has obsessive compulsive disorder, OCD.
I love this. Every door should just push out.
His obsession, germs, an obsession made famous with his trademark fist bump.
And what's the difference between shaking the hand and the fist bump?
In my mind, this is a petri dish. Otherwise, I would spend the day as I have in the past in my life in the men's room, rubbing and scrubbing and scalding.
But as we were about to learn, Howie Mandel's OCD goes far beyond that fist bump. Off stage, it is all-consuming.
Look, everything's brand new each day. That's normally how a workstation looks. Look at my stuff. It's all brand new, not touched.
Even Mandel's trademark bald head is this way by choice.
This feels so streamlined and so clean. You know, it just feels cleaner.
Not even 8:30 in the morning, and we've barely scratched the surface. Mandel has written a new book called Here's the Deal, Don't Touch Me, revealing his at times crippling struggle with OCD.
It's uncomfortable, and it's hard, and it's somewhat embarrassing. There were many times when I wanted to back out. I'm not somebody who sits down with strangers as I sit here.
We go way back.
But it's not only you, it's them.
Mandel's fans would never know just how deep it goes. Until now, the audience had only heard this.
Howie Mandel does not shake hands, okay?
Howie
You either
Mandel does
knuckle
not
him, you can hug him. You can knuckle him, you just can't shake his hands.
Backstage, it's the rush to the set. Howie Mandel has been on stage for 30 years now, first making his mark as a manic young comic from Toronto. There would be more than 20 appearances on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson.
I've been carrying this for about 2 months now. It's a lucky rabbi's foot.
See, a lot of folks would think that's what would set off a panic attack, is sitting next to Johnny Carson, your idol.
That's totally different than the fear that OCD injects into my life, which is terror.
He would go on to star in the TV drama St. Elsewhere.
That's Dr. Twerp to you.
He was the voice of Gizmo in Gremlins. And Bobby in Bobby's World.
I don't think you should plug that in.
His daytime talk show.
Here's Howie.
It had a short run. Years went by, and then just as he considered bowing out of show business altogether, the phone call that he first considered an insult.
Your wife called this one, though, right?
Yeah, my wife said take it, take the deal.
Mandel tells us he never could have predicted the show's success, an audience of nearly 20 million viewers an episode. Nor did he imagine he'd ever be talking about his mental illness.
You dropped the pill.
Yeah.
As our camera rolls,
yeah, it's right here.
He drops the one anxiety pill he'd brought with him to the set.
I don't want you to touch the floor, and I won't touch the floor. I mean, now it's coming off like crazy. But why? I'm not going to take it.
To this day, Mandel is in therapy and on medication for the anxiety that comes with his OCD. He won't say which kind because he knows the millions of adults suffering from OCD are also looking for a cure-all. For him, this latest medication came after working with his own doctor and therapist.
But you only brought one pill from the hotel.
Yeah.
So that means you'll go without it rather than have the one pill that you have.
Right.
This is precisely the kind of moment Howie Mandel kept secret for so many years, until he let it slip, his battle against OCD on The Howard Stern Show.
You know, I've got a germ fetish. What is your big fear? You're going to get disease? You're going to get sick?
Yeah.
Did you want to take it back immediately?
It was devastating to me. You know, I was incredibly embarrassed, and I thought I had humiliated my family, and I thought that this is going to be the end of my career because people are going to know that I do have mental health issues. It was like, what have I just done? What did I do? What did I do? It wasn't funny.
It wasn't funny, but it was real. And like the 40 million American adults who suffer from anxiety disorders, Mandel's began when he was just a child. He remembers as far back as 6 years old.
They would make fun of me because I couldn't tie my shoes. Well, I could, but I didn't want to touch it. But I don't want to say I'm afraid to touch it because it's dirty, so I didn't.
The battle in his mind was constant.
I had like a fight going on inside. Like I got to wash my hands, or I feel filthy, or I haven't spent enough time in the shower, or there's.
That's definitely a prime example of a germaphobe. In his line of work, most definitely, accommodations had to be made. Not everybody's privileged, Dr. Moss, in their work settings, when they're in their family, around their family, for other people to make those type of accommodations.
Yeah, so, unfortunately, in that situation where he's kind of poised with, do I take the pill, do I not take the pill? There's a group of people who can work around him, right? Help him work around that. But other people, in other situations, they don't have that much support. They don't have as many options. So, for some people, their symptoms may be so severe one day that they just can't go to work. And it turns into a few days, it turns into a few weeks and being unemployed. So it does create a great deal of disability. But I wanted to kind of differentiate something if I could. You know, so we've been talking today about obsessive compulsive disorder, right? So that's the condition of obsessive thoughts, compulsive behaviors, greatly debilitating. But then we have these people that we live with, that we work around, and they're just ultra rigid. They just have to have things a certain way, have to have things their way, not able to see another vantage point. They may be fixated on cleanliness and structure, but it's really because they just know that that's just the way that things should be. And that actually points to another condition. That points to obsessive compulsive personality disorder.
Oh, wow.
So these controlling people, the quote unquote neat freaks, who tend to really at times command that others are around them conform to their beliefs or their behaviors. So that's a different type of condition than what we're talking about with OCD. A lot of people, when they hear OCD, they tend to think about the other, which is actually a personality disorder.
So there's two different disorders, and they're somewhat competing at times because one says, I am the way I am by myself, and there's some challenges. And the other says, I am the way I am, but I want to recruit you. I want to evangelize you in a sense. And I want you to be like me.
Right.
Now, some people, Dr. Moss, may not look at it as a mental illness or a personality defect. They just may say the person's stubborn.
Stuck, stubborn, headstrong, controlling is a common word. A very controlling person who likes to control their environment, to some degree, control the behaviors of other people. That tends to be people who have obsessive compulsive personality disorder. And they're challenged in being able to be on teams with other people, to work with other people, because their beliefs are so rigid that it doesn't allow flexibility for them to, engage with other people long term in a very healthy way.
Yeah, that's very informative because some, I like to label those folks, absent of having the OCP as Frank Sinatra type people. I did it my way and I want it my way. And sometimes really people think, every day is Burger King and they can have it their way. So I think it's interesting and it's a challenge for people, and so how can we help people that may be displaying, having both of these disorders? How can we, folks may, look at this show tonight and know someone who's not been diagnosed, but is displaying these type of behaviors that are in line would be, with having a diagnosis of these disorders. How can we cope and function with folks like that who get out the car and walk circles around the car and check every door, make sure it's locked? And how can we cope with people who we deem to be neat freaks and control freaks?
Well, if we think about obsessive compulsive disorder, of course, having a great deal of patience, right? Being able to be patient with them as they go through the mental checks that they sometimes have to go through, or through the compulsive behaviors, and then try to help them to allot for an amount of time that's necessary for them to work their way through that so they can get on to the task that needs to be completed. That's a big help, and continue to give reassurance. As always, try to point them towards treatment. Be very supportive. Let them know that, hey, there are things that can be done that can help you with that. There's medication that can be taken. If you don't want to take medication, there are different forms of counseling or therapy that may be effective in helping people with that. So that's the biggest help. Reassurance, helping them to allow enough time to kind of walk through that until they can get into treatment, and hopefully, over time, a lot of these symptoms will start to improve.
Well, a lot of people today believe in holistic medicine.
Yeah.
How does one's diet affect or not affect their ability to deal with either one of these two disorders?
Well, for most of us who suffer from any type of mental health condition, most of the time we want medications that aren't very stimulating, right? So high fructose corn syrup, which is in almost everything that we eat here in America, but trying to avoid, high sugary foods. Try to avoid artificial sweeteners. So we know that that causes a great deal of stimulation for the brain. Trying to minimize the amount of caffeine that we take in. Caffeine increases anxiety. It lowers the threshold for which we become anxious. And also avoiding alcohol. People tend to think that if we drink alcohol, we'll be able to relax, but that relax is only, very short lived. And all that it does is create a worse syndrome when we think about anxiety disorders. And then for children, we've had the discussions about red dye, and also the other things that we've talked about that we should try to avoid. So those are some big things. So the other things that we can do, that we can eat, that can help us with our symptoms, right? So, things high in turkey, things that are high in fish oils, right? Trying to take those in, balanced meals, trying to make sure that we're well hydrated. When the brain is stressed by not getting enough good foods, then it has less resiliency in being able to push back against some of these symptoms.
So even with medication, even with psychotherapy, the level that we're having to cope with these two disorders can largely depend upon what we're consuming.
It is. Now, we had a talk before the call today that I had been overseas, right? That I had been in Europe, and I spent a week going to 2 or 3 countries there. And what I'll tell you is that they are ahead of the curve on a lot of this. When it comes to artificial sweeteners, when it comes to the amount of sugar that's in foods, when it talks about the use of dyes, they're well ahead of this compared to America. We think about healthy eating, and then we also know that healthy eating translates to, improvement with our mental health.
Well, once again, as always, Dr. Moss, this has been very informative, and I'm hopeful that those that are watching tonight and will be watching this particular episode as it is rebroadcast, we'll leave away with a couple things. Is that whatever you have, you can live with, and information is key, and that from day to day, it's not something that's going away, but it's something that can be managed, whether that's through medication, psychotherapy, and diet and exercise. And so to all of you that have joined us tonight, and to those of you that will view this broadcast in the future, as always, we want to encourage you to feel better, to become better, and ultimately to live better. Good night, everyone.